go ahead and call this meeting to order. I want to start by sharing, obviously, I am not Representative Stanford, nor am I the new chair of this committee. Representative Strom Peterson is going to be chairing this committee. However, unfortunately today he is dealing with a family emergency, and so he's not able to participate today, but we will make sure that this recording gets back to him and all of your lovely comments are shared with him. So I've asked Representative Shelley Kloba, who has previously vice chaired this committee, to serve as our vice chair today as I serve as your acting chair. And as you all know, Representative Chambers is the assistant ranking member on this committee, and Representative McEwen is also unavailable. He's the ranking member, so Representative Chambers is going to fill in for him today. But we look forward to this very packed agenda, as you'll note. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right into it. I'm going to go ahead and start with the first half of our work session, which is the status of the marijuana industry and the market, and invite our four panelists to come up to the front. There's an extra chair over here to our left. So Representative Kloba, if you'll go ahead and announce the panel, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So our first panel is going to be from the Cannabis Alliance, and we have Lara Kaminsky, Danielle Rosellison, and Shauna Mindt, please.
And just for the context of time, we're going to give you about 10 to 15 minutes between the three of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Representative Reeves and members of the committee, for inviting us here today to give you a status of the industry. My name is Lara Kaminsky. I'm the Executive Director of the Cannabis Alliance. I've brought with me today a couple of my members, and I'd like to let them introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. I'm Shauna Mindt. I'm the owner of Always Greener Downtown, which is Redmond's first cannabis retail store. I've been in the industry since the beginning of I-502, and with my partner, Jenny, worked with the city of Redmond to establish the marijuana zoning there.
Good morning. My name is Danielle Rosellison. I'm the CEO of Blazin Productions. We're a licensed cannabis farm. We were the 13th people to apply for 502, and we're licensed in 2015. We're also one of the 2 farms out of over 1,400 that produce medically compliant product.
So just a little bit about the Cannabis Alliance. We are the largest membership base in Washington State with almost 300 dues-paying members. We are the only organization in Washington State that represents the entire cannabis industry, including not only licensees, producer, processors, retailers, but also labs, transit companies, ancillary businesses, and individual and patient stakeholders. The people and businesses that comprise our membership are the heart of our organization and of the industry. They are instrumental in guiding our overarching mission and goals. So the top issues that we would like to address today are the following: taxation, traceability, safe consumption, which actually incorporates 2 kind of different issues: safe products as well as safe places to consume, as well as medical access and research and best practices. You will see that each one of these topic areas touches into your 6 areas that you would like us to address, some of them, most of them more than 2. These are not in order of priority, just some of the issues we'd like to bring to you today. So starting, this image is from the Tax Foundation. It illustrates how high the tax is on our cannabis industry here in Washington compared to other states with legal adult use cannabis. Our excise tax is 20% higher than our neighbor to the south. This high rate has detrimental consequences and impedes the success of our regulated businesses and negatively impacts the consumer, primarily our patient population.
As a retailer, the 37% excise tax plus the tax of 10% for sales tax has us paying 47% off the top, not including the federal taxes, payroll taxes, and just other regular business expenses. When you couple that with the 280E, where we virtually have no tax incentives or relief, you can start to see just how crippling this is to our small business. It's now been 5 years of safe legalization, and we're still not being treated as a normal business. There needs to be some relief from this excessive high tax rate, or legal Washington businesses like mine will continue to struggle and fold. We need solutions for long-term sustainability, and this is no longer an experiment. It's time for Washington to take the lead again.
We're really lucky in the state because we're incredibly conservative when it comes to regulations. There's actually 7 credit unions that do business with cannabis licensees. The problem is that they're usury rates. So it costs us $250 to have a checking account. We have to pay a percentage of all cash deposits, and any business loans or line of credits are more than double what I pay for my credit card interest rates.
So, in addition to lowering the excise tax rate to something more in line with the national average, we actually see an opportunity to help our struggling businesses survive by granting access to some of the tax revenue that we've already generated in the form of a business loan.
It's also really imperative that we give licensees an opportunity to sell non-Schedule I narcotics. With the passage of the federal farm bill in 2018 that legalized hemp, anything that's below 0.3% THC is legal. So if we were allowed to sell our roots and our leaves and less than 0.3% products like topicals and whatnot to the open market, that would help alleviate some of the tax issues that we're having because we could write more stuff off and have more avenues for economic development.
And along that line, from what Danielle was just saying, additionally, allowing retailers to sell non-cannabis merchandise would open up the opportunity to do more normal business, qualifying for federal tax deductions, with the goal being really to help us thrive instead of just barely surviving like we are now.
So since traceability. So since the inception, traceability has been problematic, costing our industry in multiple ways. The most recent upgrade in July of this year was just one more massive and unnecessary hit to our industry. In just 1 week, 26% of businesses who took our survey lost more than $25,000 in revenue in just 1 week.
You guys usually deal with like millions and hundreds of thousands, so I just want to put this in perspective from a producer-processor. 98% of producer-processors do less than $100,000 worth of business in a month. That includes Blazin. And so when we're talking about losing more than $25,000, that is a huge, huge impact to our struggling businesses.
Yeah, the first change from a retailer's perspective too, the first change from BioTrack had us tracking all of our deliveries and our sales by hand and submitting weekly Excel spreadsheets for nearly 6 months. The next change, we also spent days making sure our inventory was on spot, only to find that the data transfer was inaccurate and unreliable. This not only has a financial cost, but it's also taken valuable time away from our business and growing our business, doing what we should be doing. From a record-keeping perspective, there's just no way that the data is correct, and the system's not doing right now what it's intended to do.
So I've been on the fetal position sobbing on the floor due to leaf updates more times than I can count. I've lost some of my best employees in response to leaf updates because their job is reliant on a working traceability system. Their job is about compliance. It's about doing sales. And with what normally takes hitting a button is now taking hours or days to be able to do, it's just detrimental not just to our business, but to like the psyche of our employees. The purpose of traceability is to prevent inversion and diversion, and we have seen absolutely no evidence to suggest that our traceability system addresses these issues in any meaningful way, and yet we as the industry continue to suffer profoundly because of traceability in our state.
So we've been engaged in conversations with the Liquor and Cannabis Board regarding the purpose, scope, and design of traceability, moving away from our current extremely flawed system and towards something significantly simpler. Our recommendation is to move to more of an audit-based system, similar to systems employed by other industries, and we are very eager to continue these conversations with the agency.
I come from mortgages. In mortgages, you have Department of Financial Institutions, which does a record and audit basis. You are responsible to do the record keeping and make sure that all of those documents are in place, and then they come in and make sure that you've done what you're supposed to do. And it's time that we grow up and be a normal business here in Washington State.
Right. Washington led the movement with this, and now we've really fallen behind with our traceability needs to be a system that's responsive.
So safe consumption. As I mentioned earlier, safe consumption in this context today concerns 2 distinct areas: safe products and then also safe places to consume.
As I'm sure you guys are already aware, Washington State is the only state that has legalized adult use cannabis that does not require pesticide testing on our products. Product safety is a really hot conversation right now, especially in light of the hospitalizations and deaths around the country due to vaping. Our licensees should be providing these 0.3% THC products to the general public due to our testing that we're required to do. Consumers in general, they want more traceability, they want more transparency in their products that they consume, and we need to be able to provide them with that transparency.
In addition to safe products, we need to provide customers with options for safe places to consume. They currently can only consume in their own private residence, which includes a large segment of the population. By law, only those who really own a home can legally consume, and this touches on so many social and economic equity issues. Those who don't fall in this category are vast: renters and the elderly and low income, tourists, et cetera.
Safe consumption solutions. So we believe that mandatory pesticide testing is coming to Washington State, but we need it now, and we need it on end products. We don't need it on intermediary. It's only that last product that's going to the consumer. That's what the patients and the consumers consume. It's what they care about. There's other options as well here that would increase transparency and not actually cost anybody extra money, which is always nice.
And we need to consider consumption spaces. Even starting with a simple banquet permit, we feel that the area of consumption lounges provides an initial opportunity for launching successful social equity programs.
So medical access and patients. There's really no true access for patients since the merging of the markets. We hear over and over from patients and retailers and producer processors who care that the cost is prohibitive for this vulnerable population. That 37% excise tax that you saw earlier is levied on patients. They need better prices and larger dosages of clean products.
As I mentioned earlier, out of more than 1,400 producer processors, Blazin is one of 2 that creates certified medical product. I can tell you a dozen different reasons as to why this is, but I only have 20 seconds, so I'm going to keep it short. The ironic thing is that adult use product and medical product in Washington State have exactly the same action limits for pesticides, except medical actually tests, and adult use just promises that they're within those same guidelines. So if they're the same action levels, why is it that no one else is testing?
As a retailer, there's a huge lack of products for patients. We hear it every day. Patients need access to medical potency, they need more quantity, and they need the price that doesn't include the 37% excise tax. Additionally, the cost of the medical system is all on the retailer. For the medical certification, from the medical certification of the store itself to the mandatory training for employees, which is running about $500 per employee to be certified, plus renewal every year, to the equipment to maintain the medical carts that we're making. All the costs fall on the retailer with no benefit. There's unfortunately no incentive for retailers to jump through all these hoops to serve the medical community, and so a majority of our patients remain unserved. Also, the way the medical system is now puts the HIPAA laws at risk as medical patients are consulting. That consulting is happening on the retail floor, out in the open at the POS.
So solutions. Our first step that we think would make a palpable difference is to remove that 37% excise tax for registered patients. This would create incentives. If a retailer can offer a product to a patient at almost 40% off, they will be incentivized to carry those products, and producers will be incentivized to produce those products.
You know, for instance, qualified patients are allowed to purchase, they're only allowed to purchase 1 ounce at a time, but they're allowed to possess up to 6 ounces. Why are we making patients go back day after day after day to carry what they're legally allowed to have?
We just need to simplify this for the retailers and put the patients first.
Research and best practices. So cannabis is undeniably the most under-researched commodity in the United States, and cannabis producers specifically get little, if any, support, education, or assistance. The state of Washington produces over 500 different crops worth billions of dollars. All of these commodities receive extensive support from Washington State University, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and other state and federal agencies, all with the exception of cannabis. The list of research, extension, financial, technical support that all Washington crops are provided but which cannabis is denied is quite long. For example, Every Washington grower receives USDA-funded pesticide applicator training and worker protection and safety training, except for cannabis growers. This industry is at a distinct disadvantage when it comes to obtaining research and learning best practices and how to safely grow and produce cannabis products. They're often left to their own devices or forced to rely on expensive private research that isn't always accessible for a wider public good.
You guys have already heard about a cannabis commission. You guys passed a bill out of here last year, which we really appreciate, and we just need your help in continuing to move that forward so we have this research available for safe products and for our farmers to do best practices.
So in our opinion, the number one solution to jumpstart research and education for all cannabis growers is through an agricultural commodity commission. The goals would be to advance the knowledge and practice of the production of cannabis through adequate research and testing of methods to improve pest management techniques, worker protection and safety training, energy efficiency, and environmental protections. Commissions are owned by all farmers of that commodity in the state, thereby benefiting both large and small operators, not to mention the consumers. We're almost done, I promise. So the additional topics that we could also address but didn't have time for: reducing waste, plant and packaging waste, social equity issues,
Craft cannabis and vertical integration.
Delivery and direct sales.
So do you have any questions?
Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was looking at the patient one. Kind of wanted to know what you were thinking along the HIPAA compliancy and the consultation environment. Were you thinking more like a consultation room?
You know, that's difficult to say. We could have a consultation room. That's definitely one way to address that issue. More so is from a retailer's perspective, we're talking about the training of the requirement of having the medical consultant as the bud tender, that training issue, and the ability to actually speak to the patient and give advice, which even when you're certified, you still can't do. So, you know, on the floor you have a patient expressing their needs and their condition, and we really have no way to help them, and it's all in public on the floor. So yes.
It's an awkward situation that any retailer really shouldn't be in the position to be providing to patients.
Okay, Representative Jenkins.
Yeah, so you were mentioning about the usage of leaves and roots. What type of usage can leaves and roots have?
All sorts of medical properties. So a lot of people want to try cannabis for medicinal properties, but they don't want to get high. And so the leaves have a lot of those cannabinoids in there that can see a lot of medicinal benefit without getting anybody high. And so right now what we're doing is that we're taking all of that plant waste and we're putting it in plastic bags and taking it to the dump. And because a lot of the composting companies won't take it because it's a Schedule I narcotic. So if we could use those instead and sell them to people that want that plant waste, then we could cut down on waste and we could still serve people's medicinal needs.
No worries. All right, well, with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next panel. Thank you guys so much for all of that great information. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. And our next group, actually, it's a panel of one. The lovely Miss Vicki Christopherson from Washington Cannabis Association.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Appreciate you dedicating some time to this issue as a work session when we're not in the flurry of the legislative session. And it's nice to sort of do a reset and look at where we are and where we've been. I'll try not to cover, there are several items that the previous panel covered that we would agree with, so I'll just try to walk through those quickly as I go through, but we do have some other issues that I want to talk about. I took this and divided it the way you sent into these 6 areas, and have tried to package our ideas and thoughts into each of those. So I'll start with the first being infrastructure. And top of mind, I have to reiterate, is the traceability malfunctions, for lack of a better word. You know, we've been several years now in 2 vendors, and we still don't have a consistent and reliable traceability system. And it has had an impact not only on our businesses in the dramatic financial aspect, but also in public safety, and the fact that we actually can't promise that we can show you without a doubt that our products are going where they're intended, even though we know they are for the most part. We've been looking as well at different systems around the world, actually, and all we have to do is look north of us to the entire country of Canada, which has implemented a similar type of an audit system, essentially providing the licensees with the required data points that they have to submit in the format that they have to submit them and the frequency, and then are subject to audit and fine if it's not accurate. So I think I've put the hyperlink to the Canada system there for you to look at if you are interested. In the what's working department and infrastructure, I would say public safety is working. I think 5 years into this, we should be very proud of what our industry has done. Cannabis retailers are 90% in compliance rate with preventing sales to minors. That's higher than liquor and tobacco. So we're very proud of that. Economic development. We don't talk about this very much in this committee, but communities all around this state have seen dramatic economic impacts in a positive manner from the location of both cannabis producers, processors, and retailers. Look only to the town of Raymond or the town of Arlington, or think of any other many small towns that prior to cannabis had really been experiencing depressed economic conditions due to other industries leaving, like lumber. And now we see hundreds of jobs, family wage jobs, and opportunity for folks that we haven't seen before. So we're excited about that. And tremendous research and development that is happening on shoestring budgets within these industries and companies as they compete to try to survive in this industry. So we're seeing really neat innovation. I know many of you have gone on some tours with us, and we're going to continue to do that, but going into the store is really an eye-opening experience. You see a lot more than what you would expect to see when you walk into a cannabis store. We have just a diversity of types of products, and it's really exciting and interesting. Unfortunately, the needs improvement bullet is a little bit longer. Number one, out of the gate, businesses struggle with capital, access to capital. Anybody that knows anything about the need to, when you're starting up a business, what you need, it is one thing and one thing only. You need capital. You need to be able to make payroll on a consistent basis. You need to be able to invest in infrastructure and all of those things. And we are in a very unique situation in this state, only along with our partners in Alaska, not allowing folks to have traditional access to capital investment as any other sector does. So we need to work on that. We have not achieved equity in this industry. While progress is made, imbalance and opportunity in the industry for communities of color, women, veterans, people with disabilities, and others show we have a long way to go. Ironically, we have an idea for that, which I'll talk about in just a minute. Lack of regulatory certainty. Unlike many other industries, and every industry complains about their regulatory burden, but let me just help here with a little bit. So take aside labor and industries, employment security, Department of Revenue, all the traditional stuff that other businesses have to deal with. We have in this industry another 4 agencies that are regulating. So we have the LCB that regulates all the things they do. Then we have the Department of Health on the medical side. Then we have the Department of Ag, and now the Department of Ecology. We need to figure out a way as a state to create some certainty and consistency amongst these agencies, because people's heads are spinning when they are trying to bounce between these different agencies who all have a say in whether or not their products can go to market. I'm not saying that those agencies don't have a role to play, but we have to figure out how to make that consistent across the industry. For retail, a couple of really important things. I'll reiterate the notion that our retailers cannot sell CBD products. The products we sell are highly regulated, highly taxed, and our professionals who offer products with high CBD, we're already the experts in this. Unfortunately, we're competing with unregulated, mass-produced, untested products in Rite Aid. That the fact that our stores cannot compete with a safer product that is tested and consumers can be more confident in is a real problem, and we should really look at fixing that. Illegal delivery is happening. So if we think that delivery is not happening in this state, it is, and it's happening in the dark and night and away from the eye of effective regulations. So given that it's happening illegally, and what we're all trying to do is bring this product and its and all of the aspects of it into the light of day and with regulation, we probably ought to start looking at whether having a highly regulated and traced delivery system for adult use in patients is a better idea. I think there are some people that might be bringing a bill forward on that. Lab integrity. Thank you for the work on House Bill 2052 last year that does put the Department of Ecology in charge of regulating our labs. The problem with it is the on-ramp for this is too long. It's several years out. And the problem we have is we have some really fantastic labs in this state that are doing great work and have high standards and are working with integrity. But as in any unregulated space, there are those that would like to take advantage of the fact that it's unregulated, and we know that lab results are up for sale from certain folks, and that does not help any of us. I would suggest maybe shortening the timeline to get that regulation up and going. A regulatory issue we've been working on for 3 years now is support for the smallest cannabis businesses, the Tier 1 producers, which you may remember back when the tiers were established, there's a square footage set for each of those, 2,000 for Tier 1s, 10,000 for Tier 2s, and 30,000 for Tier 3s. What was very, very quickly realized by Tier 1 folks is that 2,000 square feet does not produce enough product to establish yourself as a brand on a store. One of our Tier 1s told me that essentially with 2,000 square feet, she could produce enough to be in 10 stores, but not consistently. And so for retailers, you know, they want consistent product. They want to be able to have it if you come in looking for it. We've been asking now for 3 years for the LCB to consider expanding the square footage for the Tier 1 producers. We are pleased to say today that we've received notice from them that that is something that's being considered now, and we really encourage that. We've seen many of the Tier 1s go out of business, and we've surveyed any of them that we could get in touch with, which is many of the Tier 1s that are still in business, and to a 1, every single one of them said the number one barrier to their ability to survive is the size of their canopy. Workforce, going into that section. This is a good news side. We've become a significant employer in the state of Washington based on some really creative work done by the Employment Security Department. And I'll say they had to be creative because we don't have traditional NAICS codes and SIC codes in this industry. So where employment security can normally push a button on another industry and say, here's what it is, they had to do some cross-referencing. But the latest numbers show that we are at about 10,000 employees, which is a lot, and over 270 million in wages. And we think this might be a little bit low actually because the number of businesses is lower than the number of licenses we know they're out there, but it is a pretty good snapshot of where we are. So that's really exciting, particularly for many folks who maybe weren't previously legally employed prior to this. But there's a bad news side of this. Banking remains a critical barrier not only to growth and prosperity of the businesses, but to the workforce. It may be a surprise to know that somebody who works for a cannabis business can't get an auto loan, can't get a mortgage, can't get access to traditional banking. So while we have wages, we have great jobs, our employees are finding themselves in the position of not being able to access the typical things that promote prosperity. And that's the reason we're working really hard, and I've traveled to DC now, heading back next week to talk with Congress again about passage of the Safe Banking Act. This has to happen. It has to happen from a public safety perspective. We're feeling more encouraged this year than ever that Congress will act on this issue, so we're just going to keep working on it. But it is a big deal. Investment. As I said before, Washington and Alaska are the only states that limit where you can receive investment capital from. The public policy objective of knowing where capital comes from in the cannabis business is very, very important. And that is, we need to know that every dollar that's spent in this industry that's invested has integrity. It doesn't come from a criminal element and is not obtained illegally. But it should not have anything to do with where somebody lays their head. We went to the Marijuana Business Conference last year. There's like 27,000 people that come from all over the world. And there are, if you've ever been to a business conference before, I think many of you have, there's a section usually cordoned off where investors sit down and meet with businesses and talk about whether they want to invest. And our folks couldn't meet with them. We're getting ready. We're going back in December, and we're in the same position. This year, Colorado removed their restrictions on investment by a bill that passed 27-7 in their Senate and 54-11 in their House. We are way behind. And I would submit to you that this is a global sector. We can't ignore that fact anymore. And it is time to look at how we can allow these businesses to grow. With that in mind, the second sheet that we passed out to you is a description of our Cannabis Capital Equity Act that we're going to propose in this next legislative session. It does two things. It first attempts to address this issue around cannabis access to capital, but it also acknowledges the equity issues that I spoke of earlier. We believe this is the only real substantial proposal that's been brought forward that will actually have an impact on helping those that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs and disproportionately not represented in this industry. We're proposing to impose a 1% fee on any investment in the cannabis business that's over $500,000. That fee would be deposited into a cannabis equity fund at the Department of Commerce, and that fund would provide low, almost no interest loans to those communities that have been impacted in this way. These loans could be used to purchase a cannabis license. They could be used to buy new equipment, to expand, to hire employees, whatever it needs to be to help ensure that we have adequate representation of all communities in this industry. We think that this will have a dramatic impact. I would note you can't provide no interest loans. That's what I was hoping to do, but the IRS they don't allow that. You have to have some sort of like 0.5% loan, interest on the loan. Anyway, we do believe that this really has the potential to help ensure that this industry thrives and that folks have access who have not had access before. Product types. In the medically compliant product bucket, there isn't enough medically compliant product out there. I really think maybe it's time for the sector and the agency and the legislature to look at what those financial and regulatory barriers are that are stopping folks from choosing to produce these products. I think it's a variety of things. I agree that testing is needed. Sometimes when we look at things like lot sizes, this gets way into the details of this, but the amount of product that has to, the size of the lot that has to be tested, so the amount of tests that have to be done make it very expensive. And also the regulations on what happens if something doesn't pass a test. So I think a real concerted effort to look at what those barriers are and potentially gathering folks to figure out how we can help them move into this space. I will announce something exciting that's not legislative. We've been working for 2 years on a medical access fund. Because cannabis is still illegal federally, patients can't access normal like patients assistance accounts that exist nationwide. So we recreated our own, and shockingly, I couldn't believe it. We got approval for a 501c3 from the IRS under this administration. I don't know. I didn't ask questions. We got it. But we have raised about $10,000, and we have just issued the first application for patients to apply to receive some financial assistance to help them with the cost of their medicines. It's not a lot, but we're making some progress there, so we're very pleased with that. I only have 2 more bullets. I'll go quick. Enforcement, I just want to, again, thank everybody for all of your work on Senate Bill 5318 last year that really sought to change the way the Liquor and Cannabis Board approached this industry. I've written a lot of bullets there. I'll just tell you that I'm encouraged. We're really grateful to the folks at the LCB who have been very collaborative over this interim and are being very proactive in rulemaking, and we're seeing changes. That doesn't mean the work is done. and we're going to continue to try to shine a light on this issue, but we are encouraged and hopeful at the progress we're making there. And then finally, before my colleagues, other colleagues come up, and particularly those in research, I would just note the biggest barrier to research right now is the federal government. We really, really need the Congress to act and act to pass the States Act. This is the act that would acknowledge that those states that have legalized cannabis are no longer breaking federal law, and this act would then allow institutions to feel more confident in conducting research. We need robust, peer-reviewed scientific research to prove what we all think we know about this plant, but we don't have it yet. And there are all sorts of Band-Aids we can put on to try to make that happen in the short term, but the reality is we need Congress to act. So we're very hopeful that they will. And with that, I will stop and take any questions.
Great. We do have one question. I'm going to encourage us to remember that we are tight on time today, but Representative Kloba?
Yes, so I was wondering, Vicki, what data do you have on historically investments in businesses that have had that transaction size of over $500,000? And part B of the question is, what would prevent companies going forward, if this were a bill in place, from breaking their transactions down so that they don't have to have that 1% dinged off the top?
So that's an interesting question, and one we should look at as we're drafting to make sure that I'd be happy to look at that. And we're talking about investments by, so like if I invested $100,000 each month to say that I mean, it's from the entity. So I think there's ways we could put safeguards in place. What we've looked at and how we arrived at 1% was looking at the investment that's happening globally in the sector and try to, I mean, it's a shot in the dark, right? Because we don't have a lot of good data, but what we're seeing in terms of the mobilization of capital nationwide and actually throughout the world, we believe that that would generate a significant amount of revenue to fund that loan program in a way that was very meaningful. We know of transactions, and we can get you some lists of some transactions and what people are doing, but we see transactions varying from $100,000 to help somebody buy a greenhouse to $5 million to purchase equity of 50% of a company. So that just depends on the size of the company and what investment they're looking for. But one thing I would say is we did try to exempt those smaller investments, because those aren't the ones that are really where the big capital is.
All right. Well, with that, Ms. Christensen, thank you so much for joining us today. Christofferson, sorry. And we're going to go ahead and invite up our next panel, Vice Chair Kloba.
Yes, could we please have the representatives who've come to us from the Liquor and Cannabis Board, Rick Garza, the director, and Megan Duffy, who's the deputy director. Thanks.
So good morning, or good afternoon. For the record, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Rick Garza, director of the Liquor and Cannabis Board. Having a little switch in our schedule today because Megan Duffy, our deputy director, had to take a call from school. So if she can't be here, Kendra's going to cover traceability for us. So I've got a lot to cover in a really short period of time. So Madam Chair, I'm going to fly through this to allow for time for questions. Also, one thing I wanted to share, and in the last month I've met with half of the members that are here to kind of walk through the work that we're doing during the interim. One of the things that Chris started last month, our legislative director, is on a monthly basis we'll provide you what I'm calling a legislative bulletin that shares the policies, the issues, the rulemaking challenges that we're having, so that we don't just see you when we're in session, but we have a dialogue that occurs, and you can contact us, and many of you do, to get information or share information with us. So that's one way for us to be connected beyond the session. Secondly, I'm going to start with bills. There are a lot of bills that passed this session. Where are we in the rulemaking process with that? So I'm going to jump into that first. Obviously, 5318 was the enforcement proposal that moved forward. One of the things I really feel good about it, and Vicki talked a little about it, is we've convened many meetings with our stakeholders and opened up our rulemaking process, and I'll share a little bit what that's been like, but we've had a really good sessions with stakeholders, specifically the industry, as we work through not only the penalty guidelines that were part of the work that you did in the bill, but some other things that we've provided, and I'll talk about that. This kind of gives you something that we started called listen and learn sessions with our stakeholders, where we have some time to hear directly from them about the proposals that we have, and gives us the ability to change those proposals to those changes that they provide. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of where we are with that bill. Just the highlights of it, obviously, one of the things we've learned in the last couple of years is those penalties are very high with respect to this industry. So we're looking at reducing the fines by 50%. We're providing a penalty deferral option, which is even more than the bill that you had, Representative Kirby, which creates a compliance program. This actually allows you, if you've not had a violation with us, to defer that violation for a period of time to get into a compliance. I think that's a really good way of enhancing the bill that you had, and also giving our licensees the ability to fix the problem before we write a violation. And then it significantly reduces the penalty guidelines violations that lead to a license cancellation. And so we've had several meetings with stakeholders to help us figure out, you know, really what we care about are the three most important things: diversion, youth compliance, and then, of course, making sure folks that are on the license or controlling that business. But we moved a lot of these penalties out of the cancellation, and I think it's significant and important. It aligns with the work that this committee's done and with Representative Kirby's bill. Also in the area of packaging and labeling, I won't go through all of it, but as you know, there was some difficulty with respect to packaging and labeling for edibles that we went through with the industry. We brought Oregon and Colorado in for a session with the industry to look at which program we thought maybe would make this a little simpler and easier. I think we're looking at the model from Oregon. I think there seems to be agreement with the industry and with the agency that that's where we probably will end up, but we'll see. Also, there was a bill with respect to true party of interest, 1794. We're looking to make sure with the industry that we want to figure out how we can provide more financing, and also that really comes down to the issue of defining control and who has control. And we're working with the industry right now on bills that were forward this year. Quality assurance. I think we just heard testimony from others about pesticide and heavy metal testing that's only required for medically compliant product. That's probably one of the biggest reasons why it could be, why it's hard to get that product, because it's expensive given that. The board is looking at rulemaking that's coming forward that will require all product, not just medically compliant product, to be tested for pesticides and heavy metals. There'll be a long transition period to give people time to comply, but we think that's an important way of getting more medically compliant product to patients. Also, on the canopy side, and we just heard mention of it, the board's been looking for quite some time the fact that our tier ones are suffering with respect to how small they are with the 2,000 limit capacity. So we're going to bring rules to the board in the next month. We've already opened up the CR 101 to allow the canopy, the tier ones, if they are at 80 or 100% of their capacity, they would have the ability to grow from 2,000 to 5,000 square feet of canopy. And then in the future, if they get to 80 or 100% of capacity at 5,000 square feet, they'd be allowed to grow to 8,000 square feet. I think that's a really important way to help them. You're going to see a proposal that we're bringing forward to try to merge how do we help medical patients and also help the grower. I'll talk about that in a moment, but I think this is a really important piece. Over the last couple of years, as others said before me, we've heard from tier ones that they're struggling. There was concern originally because we've been told that there is a large production out there. There's only 50 tier ones that would be able to move up that have 80 to 100% of their capacity today, but that's a quarter of the folks that are there. And so I think this is a really good way to move forward in helping those tier ones. And I just to share with you, I think we've really increased our engagement and collaboration with the industry in our rulemaking process. That has to do with the fact that we brought someone from the Department of Health that had a different way of doing rulemaking that was more collaborative, I'll be honest with you, than probably the process we were using before. but I think that's been a real improvement, and I've heard that directly from the industry and from others, the prevention community, law enforcement. So it's not just the industry that we speak with respect to the industry that we regulate. But I just wanted to share there's a lot more collaboration occurring in that rulemaking process. Also, as you know, we hired a consultant to come in and look at our enforcement practices. That meant some of you in the room being contacted, and I know you spoke directly with the consultant. So really we sat down with not just the cannabis industry, or the consultant did, but with the alcohol industry. That's going to give us a kind of a better indication of, is there a difference in relationship between an industry that's been regulated for 80 years and one that's been regulated truly for only 5 years. And so the initial interviews have all been completed, both with the enforcement division, with our board, with licensees, and with the trade organizations that represent the licensees. Because many of our licensees aren't represented by a trade organization, we actually held 2 public forums. I should say we didn't, the independent consultant did, in Seattle and in Spokane, to allow anyone to come forward and provide information with respect to the relationship with our enforcement division. In the next month and a half to 2 months, we'll get recommendations and findings that we'll share with all of you, I think by December 1st, but I wanted to share that process has been very extensive, and we look forward to sharing that information with you when we get it. I think I heard Vicki make a mention to something that I think we've been working on the last year that's important to share with you. Specifically, the fact that really there hasn't been a lot of consistency within state agencies with respect to this industry. In fact, you know, you heard mention of the work of the Department of Ecology, which won't be till 2024 with respect to the work with certifying standards for labs. And we need to continue to do that. But our board chair, just to share with you, and I've shared this with some of you, began discussions with the other agencies early this year. And we call it Cannabis 2.0. What we've learned is, remember that we were given an initiative, this agency, given most of the responsibility and authority of putting the system together. I wish we had been like Colorado, that had a constitutional amendment that was passed, and then the legislature, the governor, and the industry, and everyone sat down together to write the law. That's not how it happened here. It happened that way there, which meant that all the departments that would have responsibility, whether it's Department of Ecology, Department of Agriculture, all of them would have the responsibility and authority to help us set this system up. Our chair, Jane Rushford, said, we've got to look beyond the challenges of the day and the year. We've got to look 3 and 5 years out of what this industry is going to look like. We've had a couple of meetings, and we're meeting individually with directors, but we're beginning to do the work that needs to be done. You can see all the different agencies that have some responsibility or should. And that's not to say that agencies like Department of Health and Department of Ag have been very helpful in helping us set this up. But remember, the prohibition federally makes it very difficult for our agencies who receive federal funds to feel comfortable in the efforts that they get involved in with us. So the governor's office has been very helpful in helping us with convening these meetings, and we see real good work happening in the future around Cannabis 2.0. And so very quickly, couple of proposals that we've brought forward, and we're getting a lot of input from stakeholders, and obviously there's a difference of opinion with respect to these proposals that we've brought forward, but these are not new proposals that have been discussed with the board over the last couple of years. There were 3 things that we thought, and our board chair and our board thought were really important. 3 areas that we haven't delved into, which is 1, how do we help our small producers? 2, how do we make medically compliant product more available? And 3, how do we incorporate social equity into the program that we had for licensure and in general for the cannabis industry? So we kind of looked at the model that we have right now for wineries, breweries, and distilleries, where in the late 70s and 80s, small wineries were given the ability to not only self-distribute, but to retail at their location. It isn't a new concept. It was a couple of years ago that small growers said, given the ability to do what wineries do in this state, which will open up a market to me that I can't have. Because remember, we're one of the few states that doesn't allow vertical integration. If I'm a producer and processor, I can't have any financial interest in a retailer. That inability makes it pretty tough for the smaller growers to have access to the marketplace. So the proposal that we're bringing forward, and it's cautious, you could go further, is to allow medically compliant product to not only be grown and delivered from the producer or sold from the producer side, but we believe this might make medically compliant product more available and assist small growers. So not only the ability for the small grower to increase its canopy, but also to be able to retail from its location. There's an important piece of this that probably, there's a lot of reasons why this may not work. I'll just be totally honest with you. One of them is that local governments would have to agree that they're going to allow for this. It would also have a part of it that was there when medical cannabis was around before it was merged, which is the ability maybe once or twice a month to have a cooperative that we would license or permit where these growers could come and provide product to medical patients. You'll see that in the proposal. You can imagine there are going to be folks who would have concerns with that. But it's a way for us to try to begin to deal with two issues: growers that are having problem getting a product to the market, and then also helping create more medically compliant product. The social equity proposals, you know, this is not new for the states that have come on board the last 2 and 3 years. They tend to be states that have a great diversity, whether it's California, Massachusetts, New York. They're creating social equity programs, and Vicki and others have spoke why it's obvious, as you can see on the slide. That was not done in the proposal in the initiative. It wasn't done in Colorado either, and so we opened up our licenses and didn't do that. We do have some licenses that have been brought back to the agency. In our proposal, we would also allow local governments to increase the number of retail spots that they have. They would have to choose to do that, not the board. But we believe that also those licenses would have to either use the state's social equity program or create their own. Prosper Portland, for example, has a program that they created, which would be part of this bill, and it's a modest amount of money, but $100,000 to $200,000 to create technical assistance for businesses that are either entering this space or in this space. And the proposal that WACA has with respect to creating a fund for financing fits perfectly, to be honest with you, with the proposal that we have, which was something we didn't want to get to, which was creation or use of the liquor or the cannabis revolving fund to create a fund for financing. But I think that's a move in the right direction. I think that supplements what we're proposing with respect to the social equity program.
Great. Good afternoon, I guess. Here we are, members of the committee. In filling in today, I'm going to be taking the topic around traceability, which you've heard a little bit about already in this particular session. Traceability for us is a key aspect of the vision of Cannabis 2.0, and thinking about what we're doing now, and are those the same things that we need to be doing in the future to meet our regulatory responsibilities to the state in maintaining public safety for the product, but also allowing for business to evolve. So currently we're working internally to strategically envision what the future might look like. Once we know our base needs, we'll be engaging with the stakeholders. We have been working with our current vendor, MJ Freeway, on developing and implementing the traceability system, and that's been since July of 2017. And really from July 2017 to date, we've had 3 releases. There was when we turned on the system in February of 2018, we had a subsequent release in August of 18, and then July of 2019. The intent of the system is to secure the necessary time, really, when we're talking about where we are now and some of the challenges that we faced, is to use that to plan future. We do acknowledge that this last release had challenges. Some of those challenges really were in a couple of key areas that impacted the movement of product. And really, though, that particular release was designed in July to address problems we had already identified earlier in the system, right? Make some improvements, reduce some of the challenges we were already facing, and unfortunately, specifically around lab results, that did not happen. So we are continuing further and working to ensure that there is no further disruption to the industry from the system itself. specifically as we go forward, and Rick will take this back in a moment, but we are having conversations, and since the release in July, we have taken steps to address several of the issues. There was a board interim policy that the board passed that allowed some flexibility for the industry specific to the new challenges that were introduced in July. We have continued to work with the vendor really to stabilize the system. And part of that stabilization is that we have put a hold on any additional releases going forward until we have a place that we feel stable. And to that earlier statement, are starting to have and have been having conversations internally on what is our approach, and then we'll be asking stakeholders to come and talk with us about what is our approach to traceability going forward. That the approach will inform what could be the possible implications to the actual system that helps us go ahead and implement that particular approach.
So I know I went over, so Madam Chair, I'm going to stop.
Representative Chambers?
Thank you, Representative Reeves. I want to know if you can talk to me a little bit about the medical side and the testing. Where's the cost? Is it in the equipment of doing it? And would you expect if there was, across the board testing, would that lower the prices on medical products?
So medically compliant product at this point has been mentioned is the product in our market that must be tested for heavy metals and pesticides, as well as the other tests that we require. So the really significant difference in the cost is the cost for pesticides and heavy metals. It is fairly expensive. There is also a cost to the laboratories that are certified to do these tests. The equipment they need to procure to actually run those additional type of tests comes with some inherent costs. We've taken a look at what we think might be the impact cost-wise on testing, and are still kind of mulling over those numbers about what would really, if you have to test for a medically compliant product in the rec space, what that would look like. I will say there seems to be quite a wide range of possible reasons why, right? There is an impact to not only how you produce your product, but the type of testing that you would need to certify for medically compliant product. That might be part of the reason. Admittedly, some of what we've also heard is that patients are using recreational product to meet their medical needs, right? And so there might not be the real industry move yet to stock quote unquote medically compliant product because other product is sufficing.
Representative Vick?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And regarding traceability, I mean, it's obvious there's been issues with the new vendor, the new design, whatever. I guess my question kind of is, are we really at a place where we need to stop and have more stakeholder discussions about what's needed, or do we actually know that we just need to get it right? I mean, I feel like my whole career we've been dealing with something in traceability, and so is there just a button we need to push or a lever we need to pull and make a change, or do we actually have to go and redesign what people want?
It's a really good question. I think what happens is we have a wide variety of opinions of what is the solution, and we won't have a solution that meets everybody's wants. So we're trying to stay really focused on one, what is our regulatory responsibility to start with, and two, where does this intersect with the business need, right? There is a whole bunch about our system that directly impacts day-to-day business and whether the product can move, and striking that balance and finding things that allow product that is legitimate to be sold at a retail space and also get us the information we need for enforcement ends up being not as clear-cut as push a specific button. There's lots of buttons at play.
But it's a really good question because I think it gets to the heart of what do we really need to know and what do they really need to report, and can we get that information by audit rather than placing it in the traceability system? Those discussions have been going on for several months now, but I just want you to know, Representative Vick, I see where we're headed here, and I think it's taking a look at the program and saying, do we really need all that information that we're asking for in this traceability system?
And I think that's getting more where I'm going to. I mean, I think probably on this panel there's a lack of confidence that this is going to get fixed, whether it is or not. And so is there something else we need to be looking at that maybe is more pared down, that maybe is more of an audit system, that maybe the vendor just can't get it done? I don't know what the answer is, but are we going in the right direction, and is there another solution, at least for part of it, I guess is the question. So
I think that reflects our feeling also.
Madam Chair, if I may.
You need to introduce yourself first,
Chris
please.
Thompson with the LCB, and I wanted primarily to jump in here and make sure that Kendra introduced herself to the committee so that you know who you're hearing from on traceability. And so Kendra Hodgson is our marijuana examiner manager. And thank you for pinch hitting for Megan, who had to be called away. I would just, one final point I would add to the discussion that Representative Vick is raising is these are very challenging issues for all states working, struggling to track this product beginning to end. And our state struggled with our initial vendor. We're struggling with this vendor. And we hear from all the states that we routinely get together with. They're having, many of them, quite similar struggles. This is very challenging work. And the comments that Rick made about the 2.0 and that Kendra made about the 2.0, that's exactly what you're talking about. We're going back to discussing a reset. We're rethinking this. Where do we need to be? How do we get there rather than just incrementally adding on piece by piece to this, the machine that we've got in the basement right now?
Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much to this panel. I'm going to have to cut off questions there because we're about 15 minutes behind right now. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next panel. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the Department of Health has brought a panel, and if we could have Joe Laxon, Blake Maresh, and Ryan Black, please come on up and introduce yourselves and get started.
Thank you, Chair Reeves, members of the committee. My name is Ryan Black, Deputy Director for Policy and Legislative Relations with the Department of Health. Today, we're going to talk about the Department of Health's role with the marijuana industry. But first, it's important to note that the department plays multiple roles as it pertains to marijuana. Probably the most visible, as you've seen, is as the state's administrator of the medical marijuana program. But the department also is engaged as it pertains to food safety, especially as the emergence of the CBD industry and its addition to food products. The department also sets the standard for the medical marijuana products as it pertains to pesticides and heavy metals. And the department also has a role as it pertains to prevention and education, which is ensuring there's accessibility to accurate information to the public and promoting efforts to reduce youth use of marijuana. But today's presentation will focus on the roles that directly impact the marijuana industry, particularly the medical marijuana program and the food safety program.
And thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Blake Marsh. I'm the Deputy Director with the Office of Health Professions at the Washington Department of Health, and the medical marijuana program is housed within our office at DOH, and we appreciate having a few minutes to talk with you about the medical marijuana program. There are really, just as a very high-level overview, three essential components of the medical marijuana program at the Department of Health. First, it's, as you've heard, ensuring that there is medically compliant product for patients and regulating what constitutes medically compliant product. We also oversee the database of patients and designated providers known as the Medical Marijuana Registry. And then we also regulate certified medical marijuana consultants, and these are folks who are not healthcare providers but are in the medically endorsed stores to provide assistance to patients. And we do these three things really to promote two goals: to provide safe, consistent access to patients both for the product and in making sure that the products are labeled appropriately. So just a little bit about compliant product, and we've talked a little bit about this and what this means in prior sessions, prior panels. Again, what separates other types of medical or marijuana products from medically compliant marijuana products is that the Department of Health has regulatory authority to establish what the parameters are for the testing for medically compliant products, and that really involves testing for pesticides, heavy metals, and mycotoxins. And there are 3 types of labeling that we provide for medically compliant products. There's general use, there's high CBD products, and then there's high THC products. Now, general use products and CBD products are available to the general public. Only high THC products are available to participants in the medical marijuana registry. As I already talked about what the testing requirements are. So I will go ahead in the interest of time and just keep moving on. Let me back up one. We're in a little different order here. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about the medical marijuana consultant aspect of our work. So as I mentioned, medical marijuana consultants are certified by the department. They are not healthcare providers, but they do go through a 20-hour training program that requires them to learn about what the laws and rules are in this state, to understand what the qualifying conditions are to be a medical marijuana patient. They also look at the different types of products and what the risks and benefits are of different types of products for patients. They also understand routes of administration. They study ethics. And so it's a fairly robust training that they go through. And each medically endorsed store is required to have at least one certified medical marijuana consultant on staff. Okay. With respect to the authorization database, it is a voluntary database, and the only exception to that is if you are a minor, if you're under the age of 18, you are required to participate in the medical marijuana registry, as well as is your designated provider. And really what it is it's used to confirm that you do have a qualifying condition and you are able to buy certain types, as I've mentioned, of medically compliant product. This next slide gives you a little bit of information about some of the statistics on the current number of card holders we have. We currently have about 14,000 active card holders. A little bit of information about the makeup of those card holders. For adults, people over the age of 18, the average age of a card holder is 50, and the most common diagnosis for which that person has a card is intractable pain. For minors, however, again, there's only a few by contrast, and the average age is 12, and most often the diagnosis is epilepsy. We have about 168 stores in the state that are actively using medical marijuana endorsement. And just on this next slide, I want to provide a little bit more information about the makeup of the folks who are authorizing patients for medical marijuana. You can see that there are essentially 6 types of providers here, prescribers or authorizers: advanced registered nurse practitioners, MDs, osteopathic physicians, naturopathic physicians, and then physician assistants, both allopathic and osteopathic. The vast majority of authorizers in the state, about 60%, are MDs. So that's, I believe, the end of my piece of this. I want to hand it over to Joe Laxon to talk a little bit more about some of the other environmental and food safety aspects of it.
Thank you. Yeah, for the record, my name is Joe Lax. I'm the Policy Director for the Environmental Public Health Division at Department of Health. One of the programs that we have within that division is the Food Safety Program. As we know, in 2018, Congress did pass the Farm Bill legalizing hemp, industrial hemp, and Washington followed suit in 2019 as well. The FDA, though, has come out strongly that CBD is not an approved food additive, and so that's put our local health and our department kind of in a place where we need to be enforcing that based on our state requirements around food safety in WAC 246215. Regarding enforcement, typically how it goes is we'll have local health jurisdictions and the food inspectors going out to restaurants throughout the state doing food inspections. They may discover that CBD may be offered in coffee drinks or some other form, and at that point they'll inform the establishment that that's not allowed within Washington State per the FDA food code and Washington State code. The other way that we're seeing it in food establishments is in grocery stores and Minute Marts, where you can pick up water or beverages infused with CBD. Local health jurisdictions are informing them that that can't be in the store as well. However, our department is being called on by local health jurisdictions to contact those manufacturers. Most of those products are coming from out of state, so there's an interstate commerce challenge there with FDA requirements, and so we're contacting those manufacturers and telling them they can't be selling their products here in Washington through that retail source or that retail store. So with that, we have a few concerns obviously around CBD in some of these products, whether it's in root beer or whether it's in honey. There's not a lot of oversight, obviously, with CBD, especially with the interstate commerce aspect of that. There's no real verification that the claims of the product are accurate, as we've heard today already. Is the CBD amount being claimed within that product accurate, and what are the specific health concerns around that? And the health impacts are obviously not fully known. The issues of dosage levels and safety around that, as including long-term effects in child development. Some of these products are on the shelves available to be grabbed by a child in a Minute Mart. So we have concerns about that. And then also the therapeutic claims around pain management, the therapeutic benefits, how much CBD is required. There's just not a lot of oversight in these products and verifying those claims. And it's been talked a little bit about today, just the importance of having more research around testing, health effects, transparency of what's in those products, and if those claims are accurate. So that's kind of where we're at with the food safety realm and enforcing FDA and state regulations around additions of CBD within food and food products. And I'm going to hand it back over to Ryan to wrap up.
Okay, thank you. So moving forward, the Department of Health is continuing to look at processes to streamline and improve processes. And many of these efforts include engagement closely with the LCB and with stakeholders. Some specific examples are included on this slide, including evaluating medical regulations to increase access for medical patients, improving training for medical marijuana consultants to improve decision-making on product, and updating medical provider practice guidelines to improve the authorization process. All of these were touched on by the industry as needs. Another current effort is implementation of 1094 from last session, which is compassionate care renewals. And this bill exempted certain medical marijuana patients from the requirement to renew in person. And so just to let you know, that process is on target for completion and implementation by November 2019. And that concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Representative Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you know, it's not all, my question isn't all about the marijuana, but it has to do with one portion, and I'm not even sure if it's something that we're discussing today. And it's everything in the news as far as the vaping and the different products that are out there that are causing problems. I'm wondering, has there been any problems? Because I know that there's THC type oils and that type of thing. Is that causing any problems in the state right now as far as health?
And that's a great question. That's something that we're continuing to look at. The information out there, as you know, there's been about 450 cases of severe lung disease, one confirmed case in Washington. CDC is still looking at it, we're still looking at it, but we don't know conclusively what is actually causing it, whether it's THC or an additive or in a mix of product. So it's something that we're continuing to monitor closely, so we really don't know what to do with it at this time. We're just still managing it, and you know, all options are still on the table.
Thank you. Representative Kirby?
I think you folks are the ones to ask. As I drive around my neighborhood, there are big billboards with very well recognizable chains of stores that sell CBD. It's a really big deal. And I've looked around and I'm thinking, from what I can find, I don't think they're supposed to do that. And it comes to me, I've been asked about, I work at a financial institution, and that financial institution isn't one of the ones that will bank any place that does any, marijuana, any cannabis type of product. And I did have someone come to me and ask me about it, and as far as I can tell, I can't find anything in our state statutes that allows these businesses to sell CBD products out there, and none of them have licenses with the LCB or anything. What is that kind of what you're talking about?
That's exactly what we're talking about with the passage of the Farm Bill. There's a perception that CBD is a legal product if it meets certain requirements, but it's still not allowed as a food additive. And so that's where our food safety program comes into play, is that it's being added into lattes and other food products, which isn't legal in the state. And so that's where our regulatory authority lies.
So do your guys drive around and look at the billboards and talk to them?
We do the food inspection piece in terms of restaurants. In terms of the advertising, that wouldn't be us. In terms of the advertising of the business, I'm not sure where with LCB that may lie. But
if I were an enforcement person and I saw that, I mean, it might catch my attention. That's all I'm thinking.
Great.
Yeah, we typically try to find that during the inspections, during the food safety inspections, and that's when we try to address it actually in the store when it's happening.
Okay. Sorry, we're running short on time, so I'm going to move to Representative Chambers, and then we're going to try to move on to the next panel.
Just real quick, I'm wondering if you can help me understand where it falls. But for, CBD and pets, I'm hearing commercials like Pet Relief or something. But what is a food additive for a pet? Does that fall under the farm bill, or is it, if it's used externally, is that different?
Yeah, we'll probably need to follow up on that. I believe that would probably fall to maybe a federal agency for that, but we can follow up on that for sure.
All right, with that, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next panel, and I encourage our members to follow up with you offline. So at this time, Representative Kloba, if we will start section 2.
Yeah, so moving into more specifically marijuana-related research in Washington State, we'll have the Department of Ecology, and Annette Hoffman is ready to rock and roll. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Reeves, Representative Kloba, and Representative Chambers, members of the committee. My name is Dr. Annette Hoffman. I am the Environmental Assessment Program Manager for the Department of Ecology. I'm also the chair of the Cannabis Science Task Force. I'm here today just to give you a brief update on the implementation of House Bill 2052, which established the Cannabis Science Task Force. It was a partnership between the agencies, the state agencies, Department of Health, Department of Agriculture, Liquor Cannabis Board, and the Department of Ecology, as well as industry scientists, industry experts in the cannabis field. The bill allowed for this cannabis task force to put the right expertise together, to put together the lab quality standards that should be the basis for consumer confidence in the product. The bill also transfers the authority for lab accreditation to Department of Ecology from Liquor Cannabis Board in 2024. So essentially, I'm going to try to be brief because I know we're short of time. The task force, we've structured it into a steering committee and 2 work groups. So the steering committee will be providing the guidance to the work groups, and the work groups will be doing most of the work here. We have the analytical testing work group, which is led by the Department of Agriculture, which will define the lab quality standards. And we have the proficiency testing work group, which is led by the Department of Ecology, which is essentially the data validation piece of this. Both of those pieces are needed for a robust lab accreditation program. When we put these committees together, we solicited interest from the community. We reached out to the tribal governments, and we tried to establish some kind of a good balance on the steering committee and on the work groups between the agencies and the industry representatives. So essentially where we are today, we've had our first our task force meeting. It was a full day meeting in August. We spent some time making sure that everybody knew that we were on an aggressive schedule to get to the first reporting requirement of the bill, which is due to you next July. And the work groups began their work that day, starting to have their discussions and putting together some work plans for how they were going to meet that schedule. Where we are, this is my last slide, where we are is essentially at the top of this slide. We've just begun the work. We have our next steering committee meeting at the end of this month, where we expect the work groups have been meeting biweekly, and we expect, well, they will be reporting back to us on the progress that they've made, and we will go from there. And again, with the assurance of meeting our timeline. So this timeline is just here to show you what's set out in the Bill 2052. So that is where we are. And
Great. Are there any questions? Representative Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that the initial report is aggressive for you, and to pick something up and launch it, I think it's right to say it's aggressive. But relative to the final deadline of 2024, now is there a point in time where you might be able to either give me an ETA? I don't want to put you on the spot now. That could be moved up. I mean, to wait 5 years to really get to a standard. Now that you guys are getting into it, I'd be curious if that might be something you could look at to see if there's something we could do to help you move that up now that you're getting it off. I'm not putting you on the spot now to do that, but 2024, what could we do to make it easier for you?
thank you very much for that, Representative Young. I believe that well, part of this timeline includes some rulemaking, and we think that there's a minimum of 18 months going to be required for the rulemaking to make this all go. But there is an opportunity next July when you receive our report for you to reevaluate the work that we're doing, and maybe we can have that discussion then.
Great. Thank you so much, Annette, for coming and joining us today and for the great update. At this time, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next panel. Representative Kloba.
Thank you very much. And so digging into the research, we have from the University of Washington, Dr. Susan Ferguson, Dr. Nefi Stella, Dr. Bea Carlini, and then also their government relations director is on our list, Ian Goodhue. But I don't know that
he's not here.
He's not here. Okay. In spirit, certainly. Okay.
Thanks. So great. If you guys would like to start by introducing yourselves, and collectively you're going to have about 15 to 18 minutes. Okay.
Okay. Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity. Members of the committee, for the record, my name is Dr. Nefi Stella. I'm in the Department of Pharmacology at the University of Washington School of Medicine. And we're excited to give you an update on the research that's going on in the field of cannabis research.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks to inviting us here. So I'm Dr. Beatrice Carlini, Bea Carlini. I'm a senior research scientist at Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute and also affiliate associate professor at the School of Public Health.
Hi, and thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm also very excited to be here and have this opportunity to share with you our work. And my name is Dr. Susan Ferguson. I am an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Washington. I'm also trained as a neuroscientist. I run a basic science research lab that's based at the Seattle Children's Research Institute. So to give you a quick background, my lab focuses on developing and using animal models to study the cells in the brain and the circuits in the brain that lead to the development of addiction in vulnerable individuals, as well as how those pathways regulate relapse. I also serve as the director of the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute at UW, ADAI, and our mission there is to advance research, policy, and practice in order to improve the lives of patients and communities that are affected by substance use. And so as many of you are probably aware, ADAI has been the recipient of the I-502 funds that have been awarded to the University of Washington from you all. And since 2015, we've been able to fund 22 research projects across the university on the use and misuse of marijuana. In addition, there's currently 13 active federally funded research grants at UW studying marijuana. And this research really spans across the spectrum of the types of research you can conduct, from basic science research through clinical research to very translational research out in the community. And so obviously we're very limited on time. Today I wanted to focus on just 4 areas that I thought you would find interesting. They're currently very important in terms of urgency in public health. Excuse me. So the first area is around marijuana use and pregnancy. And one of the studies I wanted to highlight was by Dr. Therese Grant, who's in the Fetal Alcohol and Drug Unit at ADAI, as well as in psychiatry. This is I-502 funded research. And what she looked at are patients that went through a 3-year parenting program, and then she looked at their cannabis use if they went through this program before legalization or after marijuana legalization. And what she found is that following legalization, she was seeing an increase in these moms using marijuana. And the farther we've gotten out from legalization, the more likely they're to use cannabis. And so it suggests that there's a perception that's being changed among people regarding the potential harm and benefits of cannabis. Additionally, this is research by Dr. Natalia Kleinhans out of the radiology department at University of Washington. This is an ongoing study at with NIH funding, and she's looking at how marijuana use during pregnancy can impact infant development. So she's going to be looking at 6-month-olds that have been exposed to cannabis while the moms were pregnant, and she's going to be doing behavioral studies as well as different kinds of brain imaging to look at the neurodevelopmental impacts of this marijuana use. And this is a really highly innovative study because she's recruiting these folks while they're pregnant, and then she can actually track their daily use of marijuana throughout pregnancy and then correlate that to the outcomes in these infants. Okay, so the second area I wanted to highlight is work that we've been doing around preventing the initiation or the hazardous use of marijuana. And this is work coming out of the School of Social Work at UW. This is NIH-funded research. The leads here are Dr. Kevin Haggerty, Jen Bailey, and Sabrina Osterly. And what these folks do are really create a whole bunch of programs around how to strengthen family bonds and relationships. And they're finding that if they work on those pieces, they're able to decrease drug use in teens. And what they're finding with marijuana is pretty exciting because they are seeing a decrease in these teens. Another program I wanted to highlight is something called the Teen Marijuana Checkup. And this is work headed by Dr. Denise Walker of the School of Social Work and Dr. Brian Hartzler from ADAI. This is also NIH-funded work. And what they're doing here is to see whether they can take this marijuana checkup intervention and successfully put it into high schools to be able to reach regular teen users of marijuana that are not seeking treatment. And so it's being pitched as sort of a checkup. It's a brief 2-session program. And what's really great about this is that there's no parental consent needed to be able to join this program, so that could be a barrier normally of how a teen would want to seek out a treatment. The other really great thing about this is at the same time they're examining how much training and oversight is necessary at the school level to be able to successfully implement this. And it's currently being tried out in 7 Western Washington public high schools. And then the last study I wanted to highlight in this area is work by Dr. Carlini here from ADAI. And what she did is looking at the ability of bud tenders, this was mentioned a little bit before, I think, in one of the first presentations, to be able to look at the ability of bud tenders to educate consumers. And so she did a study with 5 focus group of bud tenders across King County. And what she found was that they are willing to educate consumers, but on things like how to avoid negative experiences with high potency cannabis, on cannabis testing, pesticides, and other contaminants, as well as how to keep minors away from their businesses. But they were not comfortable talking about other kinds of issues, such as driving under the influence or use of marijuana during pregnancy. Okay, so then the last two studies I wanted to highlight are coming out of our basic science departments. So this first project is one being conducted by Dr. Benjamin Land in the Department of Pharmacology with I-502 dedicated funds. And what he's looking at here is he has a mouse model of chronic pain. So chronic pain is notoriously hard to treat. And what he's finding is that the short term, both THC and CBD are as effective as at morphine at reducing this pain. And what's really important is that over time, morphine shows tolerance, but THC and CBD are remaining effective. So they're able to still treat this long-term chronic pain. And this is really important in light of the opioid epidemic, because this group of folks are so hard to treat. They require being on medications for long periods of time. And with opioids, that means escalating doses. And that means that they're especially vulnerable to developing addiction. So we have a really high need right now in the country to be developing non-opioid alternatives to managing pain. And then the last basic science study I wanted to highlight, I find to be particularly interesting, super innovative. This is work being done out of pulmonary medicine by Dr. William Altemeyer. And what he did was he actually developed a mouse model of marijuana smoke inhalation. And then what he's looking at is how this exposure alters immune function of the lungs when they come into contact with just general diseases, viruses. So he's infecting these animals with the flu and seeing, can their lungs, how do they respond to just a regular flu virus? And I think this really highlights how marijuana can have these unintended consequences just more broadly on general health that we don't always think about. And then of course it's been brought up now with the vaping issues that are happening in our country. Now there was just one report in King County today. And I think what this really highlights, hopefully for you all, is that UW is really at the cutting edge of the kinds of research that we're doing. And we have the ability, when we see things in the news, when we hear about what's going on, to actually bring this very quickly to the bench and start studying these things. And then the last slide before I turn it over, I just wanted to highlight that at ADAI, we also do a lot of disseminating the knowledge that we're collecting. So I'll refer you down to the two websites, both our own website and then the learnaboutmarijuana.org website that we maintain, where it has lots of different kind of information that hopefully you and your constituents will find valuable.
Thank you, Susan. Okay. This is just to give a little bit of background on the areas that I think about. So I'm a basic scientist, and I think really about, I've been doing research in the cannabinoid field for 25 years, and I think research from the molecule all the way to preclinical and to humans. The two areas of interest that I'm working on are how to develop novel medicines to treat epilepsy and cure possibly brain cancer, and the goal is to go all the way to clinical trials. I'm also the executive director of the Center for Cannabis Research at the University of Washington, which allows me to have a broad view on the field of cannabis research. I think we already talked about the current landscape with I-502 and the Farm Bill, and I think what I'd like to highlight here is that we need to consider cannabis research and its impact as a continuum. On the left, you have actually very exciting, promising things in developing completely new medicines, possibilities to reduce harm, but also there's some possible risk for vulnerable populations. And this is also applicable for the Washington market-oriented cannabis sales, where clearly we've increased the number of jobs and reduced incarceration. That's very good. There's an opportunity for us to have an impact on the environment if we control the contaminants and take care of our water. And we already talked about one of the risks is that we have overt marketing. So what I wanted to do is just kind of give a quick context of what the field is thinking about. There's actually quite a bit of difficulty to separate the two plants of hemp and cannabis in terms of botany. And it's truly a separation along the lines of the two molecules, THC versus CBD. And currently the field thinks about THC and CBD producing two very different areas of biological responses. I have a little cartoon here of a diversity group of people, and the idea here is that cannabis will impact people differently depending on who they are. So for cannabis, for THC, we think about psychotropic effect. For medical, we think about analgesia and appetite, but there's some clear side effects. especially when it's used by adolescent on the developing brain. And then some people really don't want to have the high that is linked to THC. By contrast, CBD does not produce the high. Actually, it probably reduces a little bit the properties of THC in its psychotropic effect. It has some very exciting medical properties in the realms of anti-epileptic and in the terms of anti-inflammatory. The big question here that I want to bring home today is we have really no knowledge of the side effects of CBD and when it's taken long-term and at high doses. So THC has a response along a continuum, very exciting on the left, medicinal properties to help with pain, sleep, anxiety, and stress, and maybe help with the opioid epidemics. I want to highlight the work at the University of Washington by the Center of Excellence of Neurobiology in Addiction, Pain, and Emotion called NAPE, fantastic group of researchers that study these areas. And we already talked about the side effects on pregnancy. There's actually several groups in the School of Pharmacy that are studying how cannabinoids pass through the placenta and how that will impact development. And also here again, the study that shows that in rodents, if they use THC during adolescence, in adulthood we have severe cognitive impairment. So we really need to make an effort to understand the impact of cannabis in adolescent brain. CBD also acts on a continuum. Extremely exciting results in the field of epilepsy, where we can actually now treat patients that had no medications before. In terms of harm reduction or medicine, there's some very exciting results in the realms of treating pain with CBD. But on the right, the side effects, we have no idea of the effect of long-term and high doses of CBD on the body or their interactions with other drugs, and that's an area of research that really needs some attention. We know that there's been a transformation in the delivery systems. Here I have some examples. The old school is to burning the plant. Now we have vapes that deliver oils, dabbing that delivers high concentration of THC in resin, and now also some edibles, forms of capsule, edibles, or even drinks. Here I have one graph just to illustrate what we're talking about. Here's an example. This is a model. It's an example of a successful patient who's treating its pain during the night. So you have on the x-axis 2 days. The patient is taking probably a capsule of cannabis, and over the night it has the relief of the pain. Here's a different example. This is recreational, more maybe smoking a joint, where the effect actually is very transient and for several hours. I'm explaining this to contrast with what we're seeing with dabbing, where you actually have a very high amount of THC that goes into the brain, and it's it reaches very high level. This is a concern because in the field of drug addiction, we're concerned of very high transient concentration of drugs that reach the brain because that is a route for addiction. And it is clear that now we have actually identified a population of patients that are classified as cannabis use disorder, and this is a rising concern. At the very top, there's actually a toxicity level. If there is too much use of cannabis, we can actually induce some toxicity. For example, episodes of schizophrenia that could be very devastating. So the concerns are the increase in potency of the compounds, the quicker onset, the increase of cannabis use disorder. We need to pay attention to the vulnerable population and how they're using it. And we'll probably be talking about the add-ons. I think we need to think about what's happening with the vaping in two ways. One is there too much THC that is being delivered? That is one problem. And the other problem is, are the add-ons creating the toxicity? Or maybe it's even both. So those are the kind of concerns that we're thinking about. So is there a difference between CBD and THC in all those delivery systems? So this is, again, the slide for the vulnerable population. It remains the most illegal drug used by individuals less than 21 years old, and we know now that there are consequences on the developing brain that last all the way into adulthood. So this is a slide just to highlight the research. Over the last 20 years, the black bar is the research in PubMed for cannabis. The dark green is THC. The majority of the research that has been done in THC was in the realm of drug abuse and the toxicity. And now we're starting to see a rise in research in CBD, and actually all the research that's being mainly published in CBD is on the medical properties. So you see how there's a disconnect between studying the toxicity of THC and not exploring its medical properties, and studying only the medical properties of CBD and not paying attention to the toxicity. So I think we need to study all of those. So we need to think about that as a continuum, all the way from the plant to basic science to into humans. And my last slide is just to emphasize the Center for Cannabis Research, which was implemented in 2017. It's a very enthusiastic group of researchers at the University of Washington. We've implemented in last year a board of directors, started some retreats to brainstorm about and identify the main areas of interest. And this year we're continuing to work. We're very excited to announce a partnership with ADAI so that we can help them think about the priorities that need to be researched. Also very excited to announce a partnership with WSU, and we're collaborating and working together. And in the works, there is a plan to implement an interstate Cannabis Research Center network, because we realize that each state are trying to work on these questions, and we want to synergize with them and try to make a better impact. So really, I would like you to think about, I invite you to think about the UW Center for Cannabis Research as a resource, so that we can help solidify the science and address the questions that are very salient right now at the level of the state of Washington. Thank you. We're excited to answer your questions.
I'm here for questions, for the scene, social scene.
All right. Do we have any questions? If not, I'm going to encourage you guys to touch base with these. Did you have a question, Representative Young?
Yes.
Good.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was making a number of notes as you were going. I guess I have a couple questions on the horizon for when we're going to have effective results from some of these studies. When you were going through, you listed a number of them as a result of the I-502 funding, but I'd like to know generally when we can expect enough, when you have enough test results, we might be able to draw some conclusions to make some effective laws. I'm also curious, just specifically with the CBD side effects that you said, because if we don't have any knowledge of what the long-term side effects are, is that something we should be looking at funding unless there are other studies out, even outside the state, that we could be looking at? I'd be curious to know that. And then the final thing was, in the delivery methods, you didn't list anything around suppositories. Oh. And is there any field studying structures in the gut, to combat like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis?
Okay, I'll let you start with the first question.
Yeah, so yes, some of those studies are ongoing. Some of those have been concluded, as well as there's a whole wealth of studies always coming out of UW. So I guess I would encourage you, I'm happy to provide you with specific things. We do write a report that outlines some of the research findings, but I'm happy to pass on any specifics that you have. We're always happy at UW to act as guidance for you if there are specific questions, but tons of studies that are already out there.
Yeah, and just to complement, we have every spring symposium of what are the main findings of marijuana research. We always invite legislators. I know it's not easy to participate. Representative Kloba was kind enough to be with us a couple of times. So more than willing. And then we record and edit to make it available for the public. So some of those things you'll be able to see some results. And again, our email is here. We can also give you some ideas.
Right. So on behalf of Representative Young and the rest of the panel, I'd ask if you guys could actually just send maybe a link to the last report that you've done to staff so that they can distribute it. And then if you happen to have a timeline of your current marijuana research, I think I saw that in there. Maybe you could send that back out to staff as well to forward to us. Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for coming today. Really appreciate it. I'm super excited to invite our next guest up here, only because I am a WSU alum myself, so I'm just going to start by saying go Cougs, and invite Michael McDonald from Washington State University to join us. And Mr. McDonald, I apologize, we're going to cut your time just a little bit short, so we're going to give you about 15 minutes instead of 20. I know it's a shame to do that to a cougar, but in the interest of fairness, my friends.
I came all the way over from the other side of the state. I could complain to you all about that. You're busy people. So I will do my best to, I will get it done, just like we're going to get it done in the Apple Cup. So, but I will point out it's 3 Huskies versus 1 Cougar. So I'm here to talk about the Collaborative for Cannabis Policy Research and Education at WSU. We call it the CC Pro. And our goal is to be the nexus for cannabis scholarship. Oh no. Policy outreach, community engagement in Washington State. So we want to coordinate and support cannabis research at Washington State University. We have 70 cannabis researchers or scholars right now at Washington State University. And every day we sometimes find out about them through the media and their findings of their studies. But new folks, it seems like every month we find out about another researcher that's doing work in this area. We want to develop policies that assure compliance with federal and state laws. So that's actually how this group came about. When the initiative passed, we thought, whoa, we better have rules about this. We're a state agency. We thought we need rules. And we've developed rules and we update them regularly, and we serve as the primary point of contact for interactions with you all, with interactions with the LCB, industry, and other cannabis stakeholders. So we have 4 areas of research focus when we looked at all those 70 folks, and we tried to cluster them into sort of groups and organize ourselves around cannabis work. Our biggest group is really focused on improving health and well-being of Washington State citizens, whether that's from basic science. So as some of you might have heard about, we have developed an innovative animal model for self-delivering of basically vapor chambers for rats, where we're studying some of the same developmental questions that the UW team talked about in animal models, all the way up to clinical epidemiological studies and some of the clinical studies that I do in my work, where we're working with at-risk or vulnerable populations. Another big strength of our work is on public policy and safety, and I'm actually going to highlight one of our Department of Justice study that we just completed, focused on how I-502 has impacted disproportionality in marijuana possession and other crimes. We also have a growing economics, or a very strong economics of hemp. A couple of folks who are doing work in that area. We also have folks who are doing work in banking as well as cannabis taxation. And then, of course, we are the land-grant university of our state, and we have a large agricultural school, as you know. And with the change in hemp legislation, we have a lot of excitement in terms of how our researchers can get involved in supporting the hemp industry. So we've awarded 19 small grants as part of our I-502 funding. Our total awards that we've given out so far are about $475,000. So almost all of our money is going to that we're receiving from the initiative, from you all, from the state government, is going straight into these pilot grants. And we're actually we have our 3rd call for applications is happening right now. They were just due, and we're reviewing those grants now. So these grants range across the board, again, from animal health, animal models of sort of addiction or brain development and how cannabis impacts brain development, all the way up to studying motivations of pregnant moms who are using cannabis. Why are they using cannabis? And despite the potential risks to their unborn children. So we have, and that's our I-502 funding. So as you can see, it's a small drip in the bucket. That's all the money that we've spent on pilot grants across those 3 years. Just currently, we have 40 externally funded cannabis projects. And this year, we've expended thus far about $3.1 million on cannabis work. So that's a overarching state of our university research. So I wanted to dive down into a couple of studies that we're doing that I think have some policy implications potentially. So this is a Department of Justice study that was completed by our criminal justice team led by Dr. Mary Storr. And what they're looking at here and what this figure is, I don't know if I can point. So what this figure shows is rates of marijuana possession per 100,000. So arrests for marijuana possession per 100,000 people from 2009. And of course here you'll see 2012 is when the initiative passed. So in 2013, it was no longer illegal, for the most part, to possess cannabis. So what you see overall is a large decrease, particularly after 2012. So you see a trend of before decriminalization happened, but it decreases significantly in 2013, 14, and 15 in terms of total marijuana possession arrests went down for both whites and for African American people. However, when you look at the disproportionality, so one justification for, or two justifications for the initiative. One was to decrease criminal arrests related to marijuana. The second was to decrease disproportionality. So we could see now is this is the latest data that our team has is from 2015. We're working on the newer data. What we can see is there's still, if you're African American in this state, you're still twice as likely to be arrested for marijuana possession relative to whites. So we still have some work to do on disproportionality. So this is a study that we just had published where we worked with the LCB to obtain information about where marijuana businesses are located. And what we were interested in is looking at marijuana businesses and where they're located. And I'm going to point here on the figure so it makes sense. We wanted to look at the least deprived neighborhoods. So we basically broke down using census data where marijuana businesses or cannabis businesses were located in terms of the first figure here is producers, processors, and retailers. And we wanted to look at using what we call a measure of deprivation or sort of poverty of a neighborhood. We wanted to look at where those businesses were. So the bottom line here on all three of these figures are the wealthiest neighborhoods. The middle line is sort of the middle third of wealth in neighborhoods, or sort of middle class neighborhoods, you might say. And the top line is the most the poorest neighborhoods in our state. And so what you can see in all three of these figures is that cannabis businesses are increasing. Of course, over time, we'd expect that. But especially for producers and processors, the number of cannabis businesses is increasing the fastest in the poorest neighborhoods in our state. So this is a paper just documenting that trend. We're not saying anything about what it means. It could be very well that it's a positive thing, that it's bringing opportunities to communities that might not have had those opportunities before. So it just is sort of something for us we'd like to study more and we'd like to understand better. So those are a couple of examples of our studies. So at WSU, some folks have talked about the prohibition or the limitations of doing cannabis research, right? In order for me to obtain cannabis, I have to obtain it from the University of Mississippi, and there's some exceptions to this. And I have to have a DEA license to do that, and I have to, if I want to give it to humans, I have to also have an FDA approval. And so at WSU, we're trying to create innovative partnerships around cannabis scholarship with non-university based entities so that we can do the work that we need to do to inform to really bring new information, important information to citizens in our state. And so we have three innovative examples of partnerships we formed. The first one is with the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, and this is a new endeavor that they've started called the Quibble Clinic. And this is a clinic where the tribe is using cannabis as medicine. And they're really partnering. And so they approached us, and they asked if we'd be willing to work with them to create a data infrastructure so that they could really document patient outcomes. And so we're doing that now. We're working with them to develop, and we're about to implement this next week, a platform for doing this kind of work, for really documenting outcomes in a platform for conducting research. So that's an opportunity for us WSU researchers who have to be in compliance with federal law in terms of cannabis to be able to partner with an entity that's doing this work already with patients. And we're going to be advising on collecting the data. We're not advising on what kind of cannabis an individual should take, but we're just able to collect the data and provide that information not only to the clinic, but also to other scientists. Then we're also working with Virta Bio. Another Coug is Jessica Tanani, who many of you might know, who is an alumni of ours. So she came in to give a talk in the ag school actually about her work. And so that was a really nice thing for our students to learn about how she's applying the knowledge that she gained at our university in her research. And so we're really excited to partner with her. And she has many partners, but to be one of her partners in her work. The last one is a partnership that we just signed a memorandum of understanding or agreement with the Pharmaceutical Research Company. And this is a biotech startup in the Bay Area around San Francisco, where they're one of the few applicants in the United States to apply to be a Schedule I cannabis producer. So right now, again, University of Mississippi is the only production facility that's allowed in the United States. They're one of the leading applicants, if the federal administration approves them, to go ahead and be able to grow cannabis and be another source of cannabis. They also, they're moving along, so they've received their Schedule I analytic license. That means that they can possess cannabis and test it. And so they're going to be working with us to provide technical assistance, because as many of you might know, or you might have seen in the news, it's actually legal with certain permissions to import cannabis for research from other countries. And so they have technical assistance that they're going to be providing our university in terms of really trying to obtain cannabis that is as similar to the cannabis that's available in our communities as possible, so that we can use that in research. So these are innovative ways that we're really trying to partner with other entities. So I want to just highlight really quickly our partnerships. We actually have been working really hard to partner with the LCB, and they've been working really hard to work with us, despite how busy they are. So we hosted them over in Spokane when they were over for a meeting over there. We had a great discussion. The UW team and I actually just met with the board this morning. So we're scheduling frequent and constant interactions with them to really be on a tone to really meet their needs. We've also, because we've been following the hemp legislation really closely, so we've been working with WSDA on that in terms of just staying abreast of that and providing any kind of assistance we can. Our faculty have a strong, just like the University of Washington, in fact, we collaborate with the University of Washington on this work. Really, we have a strong, a huge strength in prevention research and prevention practice. So preventing problematic drug abuse in youth, and that's funded in part by DBHR. We work closely with the University of Washington, though closely enough, I think I messed up your acronym there, Neffy, I'm sorry. And we also have visited some of the Neffy showed that nice figure of all the other states who are doing cannabis research and the universities there. So we were fortunate enough to visit University of Nevada, Reno, and we came down there to really talk with them about how to set up they're another land-grant university, how to set up their cannabis work. We've also worked with University of Colorado, who's doing a lot of work in clinical trials in cannabis. And our group has led the way in terms of the Council for Government Relations, which is a national university organization of administrators in terms of really establishing solid evidence-based policy around what university faculty are allowed to do and not do. We've also worked hard to listen and to be partners with industry. We have a daily almost calls from the industry, particularly producers, our growers asking us to provide technical assistance. And because of the prohibition against cannabis as a Schedule I drug, we struggle to do that, but we really have been working hard to listen and to listen to the industry, to know their needs and really understand where they're coming from. So our next steps are that we're going to form a center this fall at the University of Washington focused on cannabis, and we really want to harness the efforts that we have, which have for the most part been some are large, but most have been small. And we really want to harness that momentum that we've gathered in collaboration with the UW to really move forward and to take on some of the big issues. The question you had before, Representative Young, was a really good one, which is when will we know the results? And I have to tell you, the amount of funding that we receive from the initiative is about $176,000 a year. And so the price of doing research, particularly when you're doing research with a drug that's is illegal federally and you have to have a Schedule I permit to get, is much more expensive than that. So for us to answer questions about, I'm going to our next slide, to really answer questions about CBD, to answer questions about the safety or the potency, I mean, really, high potency products, I went to a conference in Spain, and a famous schizophrenia researcher there presented data showing a direct correlation between the THC products that were available in large European cities and the prevalence of first episodes of psychosis. And there is a strong correlation. And that's where the highest, well, I'm sure you can get higher, but on average, the high potency is 20%. So potency is really something, when you go back to Dr. Stella's slide that he was talking about, sort of the harms and benefits, potency is one thing we need to look at. But when we rely just on federal funding, which is tough to get, we really, that constrains us, and we struggle at times to be able to answer some of those really important big questions in a definitive way so that you can make policy. So you all have invested a lot in K through 12 education. I know over the last few years, I heard that. And you all have invested a lot in mental health, and I want to thank you all for that as a mental health researcher. But I want to make it clear that if we need investment in cannabis research as well, both universities, because those investments, whether it's young people, K through 12 students, or it's people with mental health conditions, we don't really understand a lot of the things, the way cannabis is impacting those vulnerable populations, and we really need that full level of funding that was laid out in the initiative for us to be able to do that kind of conclusive work. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. I know you are really busy. I have a few other points here. The hemp change was huge for us. I think we're really excited to jump into that space. And of course, if you can get the federal government to change the rules around cannabis being a Schedule I drug, that would be fantastic. If you can call them up. So our website is here as well. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Are there any questions? Short answer. Thank you for coming so far. I'll just close out this committee hearing first and foremost by thanking our staff for working so diligently over the interim to get all of you to join us today. I also want to thank all of the panels, whether you drove from just up the road or across the state. Our big task in this meeting was really to focus on how we explain the marijuana industry as an actual industry, and that's why you kept hearing some of our panelists refer to kind of the 6 areas that we asked them to speak to, which were infrastructure, workforce, investments, product types, enforcement, and R&D. So just really want to thank you all for kind of confining your work there. And then Chair Peterson texted me during this meeting just to again convey his apologies for not being able to attend today, but as I said, he's dealing with a family funeral, and he's just very excited to be working with everybody. And this would just be my big hint to you, as Chair Kirby modeled earlier today. If you've not met Chair Peterson in this community in particular, highly encourage you to get on his schedule and get to know him and educate him on all of the things that are important to you all in this community. Look forward to working with you all. We'll see you in November. Thanks.